Good afternoon, everyone. You are welcome to our first international webinar on Japan and India Historical and Cultural Partnership. This is being organized by Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Jesus and Mary College in collaboration with South Asia Research Center, Soka University. I would request our principal, Dr. Sandra Joseph, to present the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Amita. And just before the welcome address, let us just take a minute and invoke God's blessings on this webinar. Almighty God, we come before you this day, seeking your blessings on each of us. As we are transitioning to new ways of being, we ask you for your wisdom to find the right path. Fill us with a sense of purpose and direction today. As we endeavor yet another webinar, we pray a special blessing on our speaker, Professor Mukesh Williams. Fill him with your wisdom as he shares his knowledge with us today. And we place before you all members from both partner institutions, Soka University and Jesus and Mary College, and all our enthusiastic participants. Fill each one with your knowledge and understanding as we enhance and deepen our knowledge and scholarship. Amen. So good morning and a very warm welcome to this first international webinar. And on behalf of Jesus and Mary College, Delhi, I extend a very warm welcome to one and all to this webinar. It is an honor and a privilege for Jesus and Mary College to partner with the South Asia Research Center of Soka University in organizing this webinar titled Japan and India, Historical and Cultural Partnership. A very warm welcome to our speaker for the day, Professor Mukesh Williams, Advisor, South Asia Research Center, Professor, Faculty of Letters, Soka University. Thank you for consenting to be with us here, and we really look forward to your speech. To our other partners from Soka University, Professor Ruhi Tanaka, Vice President of Soka University, Professor Karo Kinoshita, Professor of Literature, and several others. A very warm welcome and thank you for being with us today. As is known, the differences between Japan and India are stark when it comes to technological advancement and innovation. Nonetheless, the two countries share several commonalities, socio-cultural characteristics, and most of all, a reciprocal relationship that has enabled the two nations negotiate discussions that have addressed and continue to address pertinent global challenges that we are confronted with. In this context, it is fitting that academia also come together and forge significant linkages and networks that will bring in exchange programs, research partnerships with its focus on promoting peace, human dignity, and value creation, and as a result, strengthen ties between the two nations. Once again, welcome and thank you very much.
I would now request Professor Tanaka to introduce our speaker of the day.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Ryohei Tanaka, Director of Soka University, South Asia Research Center, and Executive Vice President of Soka University. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be here today. I would like to thank the Principal of Jesus and Mary College, Dr. Sandra Joseph, former Principal Dr. Sister Roseli, Dr. Alka Marwaha, Dr. Ameta Motwani, and all the faculty members of IQAC JMC webinar team who have worked really hard to make this webinar a possibility. South Asia Research Center completed 1 year since its establishment on July 16, 2019, and its aim is to promote research and academic exchange between Japan and South Asia. Professor Mukesh Williams, who is the advisor to SARC, South Asia Research Center, will be speaking about the historical and cultural partnership of India and Japan. He has been an integral part of Soka University for many years as a professor in the Faculty of Letters, and he has been responsible for the connection between Soka University and St. Stephen's College. Now, as the advisor of South Asia Research Center, he is helping us further strengthen our connection with South Asia and South Asian universities. He has been a great support, and I hope you can learn a lot from him today. This being the first of many collaborations with JMC, I hope that the success of today's event will be the beginning of a great partnership leading to many more events and exchanges with JMC. I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and please have a great session. Thank you.
May I request Professor Williams Mukesh to start with his speech. The speech will be followed by a question-answer session. So I will be moderating, and whoever wants to ask the question, they can put their questions in the chat box. I will invite participants to ask their questions one by one.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mukesh Williams, and I am from Soka University. And today's lecture is on the historical and cultural partnership between Japan and India. So, my style is like this, that I have a PowerPoint, as you can see, and there are some pictures in the PowerPoint which are directly connected to my lecture. But because I am condensing 1,200 years of partnership between Japan and India, you may feel that many things are left out because they have to be. And you may also feel that certain things are not addressed in detail. So please do ask questions. This is a kind of lecture that I do, 12 lectures for one semester. So there are many lectures which are not included here. So please forgive me for that. And 12 lectures would mean a lot. And here I would like to condense it within about 40 minutes or so. That's what I've been given. So without much ado, let me begin. So today my learning objectives, as you can see, is to help you understand the historical and cultural partnership between Japan and India. From this lecture, you will reasonably infer that to bring out 1,200 years of history between India and Japan, it depends upon the various ideas that are propagated, the ideology, and the people who developed different partnerships depending on their self-interest. So the lecture will focus on 1,200 years of different kinds of partnerships. The history and the historical amnesia, how people study and how people forget histories. The third thing I want to do is to talk about the image of India in Japan. How from a heavenly abode it became an IT country. And how the image of Japan in India also underwent a dramatic change over the centuries. Then I would like to talk about the influence of spiritualists, intellectuals, revolutionaries, traders, sailors, or a lot of professionals, various intellectuals who come and go. So these are the things that you would hopefully take back from this lecture. And finally, I had been asked to talk about the post-COVID-19 partnership and how do I imagine that kind of partnership, and try to give you my opinion. So by the end of this lecture, you will be able to explain the partnership or partnerships that exist between Japan and India, and to see future possibilities. So this is the goal, the learning objective of this webinar. My thesis statement is this, that to retrieve 1,200 years of history is not so easy, because there is a lot of discontinuity. And how to place a continuous pattern on it depends on how we look at it. So when we enter this historical paradigm, not even period, a paradigm of two nations, we have to see which are the points of entry. So I would like to show you the different points of entry into this great history. So now I move to the main idea, the meaning of partnership. And as you can see, a partnership in Sanskrit would be sajedari, which means to work together to make a profit. We are always thinking of that. Whatever be the goal, some kind of profit need to arise. In Japanese, the word is kyodo, which means to work together. To work together. So this is not just profit, it is the ability to be able to work together. Partnership is also sambandh, which is more of a family or a community relationship. So JMC and Soka, we can work together because we understand each other. Otherwise, there is no conflict. It's so easy to understand. That's the kind of family that we are talking about. So unless you feel that the earth is one family, or that you have a mission, you would never go to another country. So in Sanskrit, we have a phrase called Vasudeva Kutumbukam, which means that the earth is indeed one family. Now, this idea of one family is not blind brotherhood, that we follow anybody we don't know. World is a family, but we have to be careful who you make as part of your family. So in the Hitopdesh, it's a very old collection of stories. Hit means good, Updesh means advice. Hitopdesh, which was compiled by Narayan Pandit, he says that Vasudeva Kutumbukam should be applied judicially, carefully, judiciously. And he tells a story. I would like to begin with the story. This is the story of a blind old vulture. Vulture in Japanese will be hagetaka. It's a big bird. And so this story is about a blind old vulture who could not hunt anymore because he couldn't see. And it is about a wild cat who's the cunning cat. So what happens? It runs like this. So along the banks of the Bhagirathi River is a very fast-flowing river coming from the Himalaya mountain. There was a very big fig tree. Fig would be ichijiku. In India, the figs are very big, huge, and the tree is also very big. So I think everybody loves ichijiku, including the ants and all kinds of creatures. So the ants perhaps once made a big hole in it, in which the blind vulture used to live. So he used to live in that place. And other vultures said, you know, because you can't hunt, we would bring some food for you. And your job will be to take care of the young birds, the fledglings who are there in this tree. See that nobody bothers them or eats them up. He said, yes. So this was a very good arrangement that went on for some time. But one day, a very clever, smart cat came by. And the cat said to the old vulture, hello, I want to live with you. Don't you believe in Vasudeva Kutumbukam? He said, yeah, I do, but you are a cat and you eat meat. So you go away from here. So the cat says, no, I am a vegetarian. And I have a bath in the Ganga river every day. And I also read the Shastras. So don't misunderstand me. I'm a very nice person. So the blind vulture said, no, it doesn't fit my thinking, I don't think. How can you become a vegetarian? So this went on for some time. And finally, the old vulture said, okay, you come and stay with me. So he started staying with the vulture. So now he was very happy that every day he could get one bird to eat. So he would eat one bird every day and throw the bones in front of the blind vulture. It went on for a few days because there were many birds. And finally, the vultures began to see there were a lot of bones in front of this blind vulture. So they understood that he must be eating the birds. So they got together and they killed him. The cat ran away. That's the story. So the idea is, don't trust everyone and don't think that everybody is your friend. So this story is very important because we all the time talk very naively, very simply, the idea that the world is one family. Yes and no. So the partnership between India and Japan begins with the individual consciousness of people 1,200 years ago. People began to feel the connection. There was something between the two countries. And people hadn't seen or visited what was India. So the Japanese word kyodo, which means to work together, begins to operate when people come. If the people don't come, people don't think about each other, you can't work together. So a partnership evolves with a consciousness. You have to be conscious first before you can connect with people. So, and the consciousness, once you connect, undergoes a change because you interact with people. And then you see whether it works for you or it doesn't work for you. As long as a partnership works, it's a win-win situation, it will continue. Otherwise, it will have to change to make it win-win, or if it cannot be changed, it must end. So this is what a partnership is. And a cultural partnership. So what I have done, there are many more kinds of partnership. I'm sure you would like to know, but I have selected 7 kinds of partnerships for you. And the first one is a spiritual partnership, which also involves culture. And the first 4 partnerships, I think it's very easy to understand. I think we are rushing. We have to go back to number 2. The first 4 partnerships are not so difficult to understand: spiritual, educational, technological, and political. The 5th one needs some kind of explanation. Business, not just as business, but business for some other purpose. There were a lot of people who came not just to do business, but to do many other things that will become clear slowly. So business is not just to open a shop, but business has a larger meaning. The other one is bilateral. Now, bilateral is a little complicated. Mutual benefit and interest, these things change, and they are more connected to bigger national organizations, especially the government. So bilateral is not something that individuals really get to do. I see these pop-ups coming up, so I don't really find what is happening. Then strategic. Strategic is also a political thing which is connected to governments. Economic strategic partnership, political strategic partnership, and social strategic. So bigger paradigms exist, bigger connections are made. Sometimes we wonder what is the difference between an alliance or sandhi, as it is called in Sanskrit, and partnership, which is sajidari, together. Alliance is more formal, especially between nations. You sign something, sign a document, sign an agreement. But partnership is more fluid in nature, and I think has greater power. A partnership is less formal than an alliance, and becomes very interesting during times of war, conflict, which India and Japan did not really face in that sense. So partnership is more sustainable, would deal about peace, would talk about prosperity, would talk about sustainable development. So both India and Japan share a spiritual heritage, so a partnership is possible. They share democratic values, so partnership is possible. Rule of law and pluralism, so partnership is possible. Unless you share certain set of values, it is not possible to have a long-term partnership. So Japan has also faced many calamities, continues to. We have floods now, ranging from nuclear disaster and earthquakes to tsunami and volcanic eruptions. Its people have taken it with great courage, resilience, and dignity. In India, we see this, the kind of strength that the Japanese people possess. India has also been devastated by foreign conquest, famine, by floods, and we have found new ways to overcome. Today, we are in a pandemic situation, which is also a big thing, and the kind of reserve that we see in Japan is something that we would like to emulate, which we don't see very often elsewhere, where people do not understand what is a mask and what is social distancing. And here it comes very naturally. The next point I want to make, having said this, can we go to the next? From India in Japan, from spiritual to economic partnership. India was called Tenjiku, or heavenly abode, by the Japanese. they saw India as a heaven. Indians were Tenrai, heavenly beings. And from a land of great Buddhist ideals, such people came to Japan, bringing classical Sanskrit script, which is called Siddham. It continues to be there in Japanese temples and in homes, the ancient script before the Devanagari. And we have Christian thought, which was seen, Christianity was seen as an Indian religion in Japan because it came from there. These images have undergone a dramatic change. A lot of us may not know this, but once you read and study, you would be able to understand this. So from the 8th to the 16th centuries, the spiritual and linguistic partnership between the two countries underwent a change and it developed. So it was imagined as a land of great Buddhist ideals. India was seen as a land of great Buddhist. And it was seen as a land of classical Sanskrit, which was used to create Japanese script, the katakana. So basically, the people from India were so many, but the meaning of even Tenjiku underwent a change. Sometimes it was Sindh, Tenjiku was Sindh. Sometimes it was Siam, and sometimes it was India. But nevertheless, whatever it was, people misunderstood many a times. But basically, the back of the mind, they were thinking about this great land, which was a great spiritual place, like heaven. So Buddhism was seen as in the 8th century, it was seen as a foreign religion, and compared with Shinto. So when Shinto encountered Buddhism, they didn't feel very happy with it. And this is the whole history of what happened. So Emperor Shomu built the Todaiji temple and invited Bodhisena. Bodhisena is the earliest, we will talk about Bodhisena a little later, the earliest Buddhist monk who came from Madurai. And why he came, we will talk a little later about it. But he came and he was given a very important position. And he was given legitimacy because he came from India through China. And that he knew Sanskrit. And Sanskrit was a very important thing. And that he knew the Buddhist ideas. So it was very important. The emperor welcomed him and gave him a very important, even today, he's remembered. We'll talk about that later. Christian missionaries also came. That was a little troubled history. They came and proselytized and were persecuted. But when they came, they were called Tenji Kunjin, also from heaven. Though these ideas changed later on. Christianity was initially seen as a sect of Buddhism and an Indian religion. It was amazing, absolutely. The next point I want to make is that in post-war Japan, there was a pedagogical shift in the teaching of history from chronology to concepts. It's not that chronology was not taught, but concepts were very important. And there was a reason why concepts began to be important. So a new emphasis was placed on social and cultural history and less on military and dynastic history. So this was all right for Japan because Japan was reimagining itself after the war. It was not all right for China and Korea. They had problems, but India was far away. We didn't have any trouble, but we were affected by this. And what happened was this, that the historical shift forgot the contributions of regional civilizations like Egypt, Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq, and India. So in world history, Japanese students know something about the Gupta Empire. They know about the name of Gandhi, curry as a shokubunka, and sari as a dress. So this kind of, most of the information you will hear today comes as a big surprise to some of my students. They said, really? We had so much of connection with India? So the making of Japanese Buddhism, the Siddham borrowings from Sanskrit, and the Kana script, the Sanskrit sound syllables were all incorporated into the Japanese tradition. Lots of names which are still very Sanskrit, from Danna-sama to Kichijoji to Gion, all come from Sanskrit. So, and lots of scholars, Japanese scholars, have mentioned that 80% of Japanese gods and goddesses come from India, Benzaiten and so on. So, in the teaching of current Japan and the world, so the scientific, cultural, and social progress to catch up with the world became very important. So this was the new emphasis. So much of the Indian connection with Japan was forgotten. The teaching of Japanese history in India emphasized both chronology and theme, but it was kind of more inclined towards a European view, which is Eurocentric. And I don't think it was something that happened naturally, but because I think no textbooks were available, and a lot of history textbooks, undergraduate history textbooks, are European. And Japan has emerged in the Indian consciousness as a great military, economic, and a soft culture power, with somewhat ethnocentric pride in their own culture. So in the last 50 years, Japan is also seen as a great Buddhist power, expanding its Buddhist reach elsewhere. So many older Japanese scholars feel that the coming global influence of Japan would be more in the direction of Buddhist ideals, a kind of return back to India, what it got from India in 1,200 years. But the young people don't agree with this. They think that Japan's global reach would be pop culture. So you can decide. We don't know. So till now we have covered a few points, especially the meaning of partnership, 7 important partnerships: cultural, academic, technological, political, bilateral, strategic, and pedagogical, and the pedagogical shift that has taken place from chronology to concept, and the problem of ethnocentric and Eurocentric biases that exist in the teaching and understanding of history. We go to the next point. I hope I am not moving very fast. Okay. So the next point, that from the 16th to the 21st century, a lot of people came, evangelists came, and scholars came, traders, rebels, and people who were fighting for the freedom of India, and professionals, IT professionals, and cooks, and all kinds of people came, leaving their imprint on Japan in so many different ways. And in the 16th century, brought in the Goan Lashkar and the Dutch and English from India. So the Europeans also played a significant role in developing or contributing towards India-Japan partnership. Sometimes a little negative, but yes, they did. So the demographic mosaic of Indian entrepreneurs in the 19th century brought in Parsis and Punjabis and Gujaratis and Sindhis, You can see some of the pictures from Kobe, good friend of mine. And some of them are good. Patela is there, and Mukesh, and many other people. And below is a photograph of Nakamuraya, which I will come again. Raj Bihari Bose, who came and set up a whole system running away from the British. So, and now you have cooks and IT professionals who come in the 21st century from Delhi, Calcutta, Bangalore, to Tokyo, Nishikasai, to conduct their activities. So the earlier settlement of Indians in Kobe, you see the Kobe Indians there. They always feel, when I talk to them, that they worked very hard because there was nobody to support them when they came to this very new land. Nobody taught them Japanese, nobody showed them how to do certain things. And they were self-made. They struggled very hard to learn Japanese. They struggled very hard to find their ways. As compared to the recent Indians, the Tokyo Indians, who are quite privileged, IT and so on. There is a lot of apparatus which is there, which helps them. So this self-made and privileged seem to be a great divide, even within the Indian communities. The newcomers and the old people who have stayed here for a long time. So the next point I want to talk about is how the Indian monks and scholars and missionaries and traders spread the religious culture and exotic spices into Japan. This is a great moment, and I think it's totally lost. Sometimes it does surface here and there, but it's a great story. And I don't have the time to talk about it in detail, but do ask me, and I will let you know. So over 1,200 years ago, Hindu and Buddhist priests interacted with Japanese temples and Japanese priests. So the story of Indian monk Bodhisena is a very good example to begin with. Bodhisena was a young Brahmin boy who was living in Madurai. And I'm sure that he didn't like the system as it was there. It was very orthodox, but he did know Sanskrit and he developed. And during his youth, he began to visualize and dream. And began to dream that it was possible for him to meet the reincarnation of Manjushri, Bodhisattva Manjushri. Manjushri was there. He died long time ago, 1,000 years ago, before Bodhisena was born. But Bodhisena felt that he was at that Eagle Peak, the Giridhar Koot, where Gautam Buddha gave his sermon. And he was friends with Manjushri at that time. Well, easier said than done. How do I find him, he said. Somebody told him that Manjushri, the reincarnation of Manjushri, was living in China. So he said, I want to go to China. So he went to Chang'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty. Chang'an was a very great and wonderful place. It was very cosmopolitan, like Constantinople, which is Istanbul today, and Baghdad. These were the great places, the three great international places. And he went there looking for Manjushri. Well, when he went there, he did not find Manjushri. Somebody, can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, so when he went to China, he saw a great culture of scholars and, Buddhists, and it was a very cosmopolitan place. But he couldn't find Manjushri. So somebody told him that, Manjushri lives in Japan, the incarnation. You should go to Japan. So he met the Japanese ambassador to China. Taijihi no Hironori. So they met. Hironori was very impressed by the knowledge of Bodhisena. And he said, I will do anything what you want to do. He said, I want to go and meet Manjushri. He said, I'll take you there. So a journey was organized and he came to Osaka. And from there he came to Nara. Nara was the capital of Japan at that time. And he met a very influential Buddhist monk. His name was Gyoki. The moment Gyoki and Bodhisena met, they recognized each other. Bodhisena recognized that Gyoki was Manjushri. And Gyoki recognized that he was the friend of his who he met at Eagle Peak, where Buddha was giving a sermon. So this bonding was very important. Gyoki was very close to the emperor, Emperor Shomu. Emperor Shomu was going through a big problem. He was facing troubles after troubles. The Shinto priests were giving him a lot of trouble. The Fujiwara clan was giving him a lot of trouble. The Fujiwara was a very interesting clan. They organized their daughters to be married with the king so that they would gain political influence. But it so happened there was a smallpox epidemic just a year after Bodhisena came. And all 4 Fujiwara brothers died in the smallpox. So the influence of Fujiwara went down. And Gyoki made it so that Bodhisena became very important. Emperor Shomu said that they had to appease the Buddha and build a great temple so that good fortune will return. There was pestilence, there was epidemic, there was famine, there were floods, all kinds of things were happening, and his empire wasn't doing very good. So everybody joined hands, and from getting stones and all kinds of things, and finally they built this Todaiji temple. This great, beautiful statue inside the temple of the Buddha was made, Varaikona. And the opening of the eyes is a very important thing in India and in Japan. You make the eyes and you pray that this metal or whatever object will acquire the force to give you benefit. Otherwise, it's just an object. So the opening of the eyes was done by Bodhisena. The brush was about 30 centimeters. Replicas are still there. And anyway, so he made the eyes. That was a very important thing. And even today, we have what is called Daruma dolls, which every Japanese young person knows. You buy the doll doesn't have eyes, and you have a wish. You make a wish, and you make one eye when it is realized. You make another wish, and you realize that wish, and you make another. So this Daruma has a beard and has mustaches. You don't see in Japan. It has to be Bodhisena. So Bodhisena, you can see the statue there on the top, and his image looks a little threatening, but he was a very powerful person who knew what was taking place. So there are lots of scholars who believe that intercourse with Hindus and with other foreigners, especially Buddhists, created a whole world which was so different in Japan and continues to play a very important role. So the emperor asked Bodhisena to teach Sanskrit. That's how people know Sanskrit in Japan. And establish Kegon Buddhism. So Bodhisena stayed at Dainji Temple in Nara and for a long time, and he died in 760. And he was interned in Ryosenji, Ryojusen mountain. In fact, he said that, give me this mountain. That was the story. I don't know how far that is true. And the emperor said, yeah, it's yours. So he built a monastery there and he's buried there. It is not a very popular place. So when I went, took a taxi and went, this is in Nara. So two of the priests who were sitting, they got up and said, wow, you must be from India. You've come to see the place where Bodhisena is remembered. So I said, yeah. So they were very happy to, and they know. They said, we are going to make a very good place for him because there is a new relationship between India and Japan. So I said, wow, this is very nice. So by the 12th and the 13th century, Buddhism had already taken very deep roots in Japan, and it had more or less gone from India. The days of its power began to go down in the 8th century. And it is believed that the Japanese traditional court dance and music were influenced by Bodhisena. He introduced that. Sanskrit system was introduced. So classical aesthetics. And so basically, because it was chopped down from the emperor down to the people, his impact was phenomenal, absolutely. And an important imperially written book of ancient times called Shuku Nihongi. It mentions about Bodhisenna, not Sena, Senna, Bodhisenna. So he's still remembered in old documents, and people, when they read those documents, still find. Because of this, a lot of people in the next century, especially Kobodaishi of Kagawa Prefecture, whose birthplace is Zenshu Temple, he went to China in 804, and he acquired a lot of precious Buddhist texts from India. And he said that he felt as if he's visited India. So this kind of big difference wasn't there in the mind. So he brought back a lot of Indian texts from Japan. Techniques were there, and also the coming of textile design manufacture. We went to one or two companies which claim that they are about 700 to 800 years old, using the ambi, the mango print. So he brought all the shibori, or the tie and dye method, the calico sarsa method, and also the ikat design of Odisha. So some of the cultural interflow, and continues to be. I think people have lost it, and a lot of changes have come, but they come from there. The next point I want to make is the 16th to 17th centuries, how Japan and India relationship turned a little dark because of the colonial powers got in, Portuguese, Dutch, and English. They traded in Chinese silk and spice and from India. And they also traded in slaves and concubines and persecuted Christians who were thrown out of Japan, and they were taken back to India. So between India and Japan, there was a lot of flow of these things that took place. Portuguese traders from Goa brought Chinese silk and spices to Nagasaki, and especially Hirado in 1615. So it was paid in Japanese copper and silver. So the silver was used by the Portuguese to build ships in Cochin. Then we have the Goa, Macau, Nagasaki route was opened in the 15th century and developed through the 16th century. And it supplied all kinds of food stuff. I don't know whether you would like to know all that, but sugar and coconut and timber and horses and grain and exotic birds and precious stones, again silk, porcelain, all these came into Japan. So, and each has a big role to play. I just mentioned them, but it will take a long time to discuss. So from the 16th to the 17th century, you have Indian Lashkar, and the Negro Kafir. So the slave trade also went into India. So a lot of slaves were there in India, and recently we come to know the African slaves were taken to France through India. So the Indian Lashkar and the Negro Kafir was seen in that. The sailors traveled from Goa and carried Japanese mercenaries back, slaves from Japan. So the Persian used the word Lashkar as an army formation, but the Portuguese used it for Indian sailors. They were Lashkar. So when they came here, the Portuguese they were perceived as Indians because they came from India. The Portuguese and Indians, Japanese didn't see much of a difference. So, as I told you, when Christianity was introduced in Japan, it was seen as an Indian religion because of this reason. So, it is believed that when Japanese Christians were persecuted by the Tokugawa government in 1596, many of them escaped to Goa and in these ships. So, of the total population in 1596, 60,000 were total in Goa, of which 1,600 were Japanese. So the colony was further kind of joined by abducted Japanese girls and by stigmatized Japanese Christian Protestants and so on. So later the Dutch and the English traders from their bases in India and East Indies traveled. And the Dutch and the Japanese slaves were in Surat and in Pulicat, which was about 3-4 kilometers from Madras, what is called Chennai now. And in the Hideyoshi Toyotomi, he was one of the warlords. He encouraged Japanese marriage with foreigners before 1620s because he felt that was very important to cement the trade between different countries. So when Europeans were expelled from Japan in 1624, this kind of trade ended. And I don't want to talk about the licensing system, but please do. The Portuguese had a very interesting licensing system called cartazes. So then we come to the next point about the Spanish missionary Francis Xavier. Xavier is very well known in India, and he came to the west coast of India and established the Society of Jesus in Goa. So he traveled through Malacca, Straits of Malacca, as you know, with it is famous later on for piracy, with Japanese exiles to spread Christianity. In 1549, he came to Japan, but he was met with little success because his translators weren't very good. But even then, he could introduce Christianity to a large measure. People in Hirado and so on. He moved to Canton because he thought this was enough. From Goa, missionaries and traders traveled because of this to Miyazaki and Kagoshima prefectures, spreading Christianity and conducting trade. Slowly, as Christians began to grow, they were seen as a threat to the dominant religion, that is Buddhism by this time. And it was because the government were Buddhist, they felt it was a threat to their own. So the persecution of Japanese Christians began immediately after that. Maria Osen of Hirado became the first Christian martyr. She was executed in 1559 for disobeying her husband's orders not to worship the cross. There were many other things, but warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, he promulgated a edict of expulsion in 1589 for the Christians, under which Sebastian, a Japanese priest, was executed. So one of the interesting points about all this, there's a lot of history here, but the point to understand that on the one hand, Hideyoshi saw Shinto, Buddhism, and Confucianism as very syncretistic, coming together as nicely as possible because they believe in the same social order and in peace. But the Jesuits undermined Shintoism, and that was one of the bone of contention. So they felt that this was not something that was conducive to the Japanese ethos. But nevertheless, there has been a sizable connection between India and Japan. The next point number 9. So in the 12th century, India and Japan were creating a kind of Asian consciousness through Buddhist analytical method and scientific inquiry. So with the rise of Europe in the 18th century, the Kantian world republic, Asian consciousness was lost. But in the 12th century, Japanese scholars kind of enrolled in Nalanda University to learn Buddhist analytical method and scientific methods. We remember Nagasena during the time of King Milinda, 2,144 years ago, the big dialogue that happened between King, what is called Minander or Milinda, and Nagasena. So the Asian consciousness was very important. The Japanese scholars understood that the way people from Asia thought was very different from the way Europeans thought. So they wanted to find this kind. In the 17th century, Tenjiku Tokube traveled to Siam. He said it was India, and we are still confused whether he did go to India, but he did go to either of these places, and he wrote a kind of essay titled The Tale of Sea Travels to India. That became quite popular. So his spiritual quest and high regard for Indian spirituality made Japanese call India Tenjiku, as we said. So the knowledge of Japan ran deep within the Indian imagination as well. At the top you see the ruins of Nalanda, and below you see classes cancelled at the new Nalanda University. So we could now cover Buddhist expansionism, 6th to 17th century, Indian monks, scholars, missionaries, traders who spread religious culture and exotic spices in Japan, Japanese scholars and intellectual discourse with India, economic connections with the Portuguese colony in India, and development of the Asian consciousness through Buddhist analytical and scientific inquiry. Now we move to the next section. The opening, point number 10, the opening of the sea route between India and Japan in the late 19th century brought admirers to Japan like Kaza, Abdul Kaza. So during the Meiji, 1893, Japan began to modernize, as you know, and opening the trading sea routes. So in 1893, the shipping company, Nippon Yusen, started the first run between Yokohama and Bombay. The ship that you see is Nippon Yusen. It was destroyed during the Second World War. So this is a rare picture that I've been able to get hold of. So the ship was destroyed. So it brought both Indian workers and traders in Japan. A Sunni Muslim teenager working on the ship's deck, he was called Jafar Abdul Raza, born 1868. He was very fascinated. He hid in the ship from Pondicherry, which was run by a French captain, and to travel abroad. And he was discovered and he made to work. And so he earned his money to travel and his passage to travel, and he came to Japan. He was fascinated by Japan. He was very young. He was a small boy. He was a young boy. But a few years later, he came back to Japan. He was so impressed. And he worked with the Kumazawa family. And he was called Kumazawa Impressu because he came on the Empress Queen Victoria, the ship, and he was called Impressu second time. And he was with the Kumazawa family. He married their daughter, Koto Kumazawa, and had 7 children. So after Kaza, many Sindhi, Punjabi traders came from then British colonies to seek fortunes in Japan. Tada Motokichi was sent to India by the Meiji government to learn about black tea production. So he traveled to the tea garden in Assam and Darjeeling, and he visited tea factories in Calcutta. So on his return to Japan, after a couple of years, he introduced black tea production in Shizuoka prefecture. Thus, he tried to establish the link, which still exists today. So Jamshedji Tata came and so on. So that's another history. Point number 11, Vivekananda and Tagore. So the spiritual and intellectual leaders of India visited Japan in the late 19th century and established a very spiritual and aesthetic partnership. Swami Vivekananda, the great disciple of Ramakrishna, who preached the message of tolerance and universal brotherhood, visited Japan. He was very impressed by Japan. He went to all the major centers of Buddhist learning and was struck by the piety, the cleanliness, and patriotism of the Japanese. With the chief priest of Engaku Temple in Kamakura, he went to Chicago, and there he praised Japan. And he said that every Indian must come to Japan to learn how to live. So he was so fascinated. Rabindranath Tagore visited Japan 3 times in the early years of the 20th century. He built Shantiniketan and Vishwabharati. They became very important points of contact for Indo-Japanese intellectuals and artists. All kinds of people. Okakura Tenshin, Yokoyama Taikan, Arai Kempo were amongst the prominent Japanese who brought back to Japan the art and spiritual heritage of India. Rabindranath Tagore admired Japan, Japanese culture, yet he was a critic of Japanese nationalism, which was rising at that time. So Tagore came at the invitation of Yonojiro Noguchi. Noguchi was a student of Keio University and very much involved with Japanese nationalism. And he believed that it was a good thing. Tagore felt, no, it was not. Human values and humanitarian concept of humanism should not be trampled by nationalism. This was the belief. And though Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and Rash Bihari Bose did not agree completely with this kind of notion, and they were thinking in different ways, but Tagore was very, very critical of the rising tide of Japanese nationalism. And he says it's not going to come to a good end. Point number 12, that there were private diaries and accounts of Indian life in Japanese family in the early 20th century. It comes from the private diary of Hariprabha Takeda. Hariprabha married a Japanese soap factory worker, Oemon Takeda. You can see him sitting there. He looks like a Bengali, but he's Japanese. She was 22 and he was 37. So she came to visit her Japanese in-laws. And she wrote about so many things in her diary, which was published in 15, next year, 1915. Book came out. So she married this gentleman, and she said that when she came to Japan, everybody came to look at her because she was something new, a foreigner, and they would not allow her to go out or do any work as a daughter-in-law. So they were taking good care of her and so on. Anyway, lots of stories are there. And then finally, during the war, I think her husband was captured as a prisoner, and she had hardly any money. She was in Japan, and she met Rash Bihari Bose, who was also a Brahmo Samaji in so many ways. And he gave her 200 yen to survive or tide over the crisis. There is a small letter that I have to this effect. I don't think this is part of written history, but it is a part of the letter which comes from his family. So Raj Bihari was very much involved. The next point, number 13, towards the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries, Indian educationists came to Japan to study the Japanese education system and introduce it in India. The British were not keen to develop Indian education because they wanted servants loyal to the empire and not enlightened masses who would be ready to revolt against the British Raj. So during the colonial period, Indians were not free to travel overseas or study in countries whose interests would clash with Great Britain. So Indian states which were free from British control, like Mysore, the princely state of Mysore, and Hyderabad, Nizam's Hyderabad, sent emissaries to study Japanese education and to use it in India. So we have two gentlemen, Vishveshvaraya, and the other one was Sayyid Ross Masood. So Vishveshvaraya was from Mysore. He was called Sir. He was a very educated. The book is there. You can see it has been reprinted. So if you are interested, please, Amazon sells this book, so you can get hold of it. So he wrote, when he came here, he wrote two books, Reconstructing India, which was published in 1920, and Memoirs of My Working Life, 1951. So in Reconstructing India, Vishveshvaraya praises the Japanese for their openness to new ideas and their passion for education, reflected in their preamble to the Education Code of 1872 to remove illiteracy from Japan. So Vishveshvaraya observed that Japanese vocational education was employed to increase productivity, improve living standard, and provide education to all, and train people to develop initiative and enterprise. So on the contrary, he found that the educational facilities in India were restricted to a few. So Vishveshvaraya started vocational school, agricultural schools, and engineering colleges to provide training to workers. So upon hearing accounts from Vishveshvaraya, Masood from Hyderabad came to Japan in 1922. He published his report under the title Japan and Its Educational System, 1923. And Masood explained how Japanese education promoted national progress and unity and reduced social inequality and poverty. So India could not adopt the Japanese model as it was under colonial rule. So politically and economically, the Japanese model threatened the British interest in India. So this is a very important point to keep in mind. There are many things which I want to cut short because I think we are going a little slow pace, and Masood saw Mirukusha and Fukuzawa Yukichi as great. One was an educational institution, the other made one compatible with India's Sayyid Ahmad Khan's idea. Point number 14, I want to rush through so that we have time for questions, otherwise you'll be too tired. In the 1930s, Bombay industrialist Lalubhai Samal Das came to Japan and wrote a book, My Impressions in Japan, 1933. Samal Das was pleased to see Japanese schools provided 6 years compulsory education, which the British prohibited in India. Japan had progressed not only because of the mass-based educational system, but also because of the vocational schools which gave skill-based training, self-reliance, and work ethics to the youth. So Samal Das felt disappointed that the girls' education in Japan was still geared to producing good wives and wise mothers. So he found a parda-like situation because the Japanese women were not seen in social gatherings. So he found ultra-nationalism in Japan was geared not for the development of the individual talent, but to serve the needs of the state and produce what he called patriotic and loyal citizenry. So both Vishwaraya and Masood understood Japan through their own lens of their own needs. Next point, 15, in the early 20th century, Indian merchants used their global networks to develop the silk trade in Yokohama. You see Chandru Advani there, and he's one of the leaders, was one of the leaders. He passed away recently. And I'm sitting with him, doing an interview, reading something. So that photograph was taken some years ago. And so many Japanese traders who did business with Indians felt that Indians were prompt in payment and had a vast network of business relations. Both were quite useful. So during the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, 28 Indians were, they died. And so the Yamashita Park, you can see behind, there's a Yamashita Park there, was made in their memory. And the Japan-India Association was created in 1923. There's a photograph there on the top, which doesn't show, but if you make it bigger, you will be able to see a lot of this activity going on. Point number 16, towards the end of the 19th and early 20th century, India began to see the rise of Japan as a great economic and military power. And it felt really confident that it watched with satisfaction the complete defeat of Russia at the hands of the Japanese Navy. And it was a very powerful message for India. It began to feel that it had hope to overcome the colonial British power in India. This was the first Asian country, Japan is the first Asian country that could destroy a European. So the British merchants and consular offices and newspapers, they gave information about this war. Kobe and Yokohama merchants gave information, and visitors who came, like Chandraprabha Takeda, P.C. Majumdar, Swami Vivekananda, all these people were quite positive. And hundreds of businessmen, Japanese businessmen, lived in India. So there was a great trading partner. India was a great trading partner in that period. And Japanese military built the Indian National Army at that time, what is called the INA. And they fought alongside, and a lot of them are buried in Imphal in eastern India. We come to point number 17, the Japanese victory over Russia. It kind of split the Indian National Congress between those who wish to follow a constitutional path and those who wish to follow the military force to gain independence from the British. So this is the long story of Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose, and I don't want to go into it in great detail, but it was a great, very, very interesting story. So after the war, India made several important gestures of friendship, especially refused to sign the San Francisco Treaty, as it wanted dignity for Japan, and it signed a different treaty. Nehru signed a different treaty in 1952. So India supplied iron ore to Japan, which needed to build its industry. 2 elephants to the Ueno Zoo. One was called Indra after his daughter. And this really raised the spirit of Japanese, the animals were poisoned or killed during the war. And it really raised the spirit of young people. And so up to now, we have discussed almost a lot. The sea route between India, the Kaza account, Hari Prabha Takeda, Tagore, rising Japanese nationalism, Yokohama merchants, development of silk trade, Japan as a great economic and military power, the split in the Indian National Congress, and so on. So up to now we have covered. And we come towards the last part of our, of our discussion. And there are just few points, so please have a little patience. So point number 18, in 1943, Subhash Chandra Bose, he was brought to Singapore via German and Japanese submarines, and he took command of the Indian National Army, and inspired by Fujiwara Iwaichi. So before Bose could complete his mission in August 1945, he died mysteriously in a plane crash in Taiwan. So the point is that, you know, in Renkoji temple, his ashes, supposed to be his ashes, are still there, guarded by Renkoji priest. And we don't know whether these ashes belong to him or not. The people of Calcutta do not want Bose's ashes back, because they feel that if they do, they would have to admit that he is dead, and that they are not very sure. So at a history conference on the INA at Netaji Bhavan some years ago, when General Fujiwara got to speak up, lots of people protested and shouted against him. So Bose, the nephew Sisir Bose, scolded them in Bengali and said, "You come to vilify General Fujiwara. You should come to do pranam to him." So every year in August, there's a commemorative ceremony at Renkoji in memory of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I have also attended a couple of them, and then there's lunch there. And lots of people come, and Indian prime ministers and all kinds of important dignitaries have visited Renkoji, but till date, the ashes of Subhash Chandra Bose are still there. So this is a very interesting. He's revered by lots of Japanese as a god in Japan. The next point, the contributions of Rash Bihari Bose, point number 19, is also very interesting, and he was also part of the freedom struggle, and he escaped to Japan in a submarine, Japanese submarine, and married in the Nakamura family. When his wife died early, he got more involved with the freedom struggle. So Nakamura is a great restaurant in Shinjuku, and I visited. You can see I'm there with some of my students, and the owner of Nakamura is there, and they gave us free lunch. Why? Because the lunch that is there, it's called Bose curry. It was made by Bose. At that time, curry was not popular, and because it is Bengali, it has a sweetish taste. It's very, very nice. It's a little costly for students, but we got it free, and he told us the history of the time and so on. But Rash Bihari is a very important person. He supported the Indian freedom struggle in the decades of 1920 and 30s and 40s. And he had wide-ranging contacts, and he was also connected to Nair, Mahadevan Nair, who has a Indian curry shop in Ginza. And Nair was a spy, Japanese spy he became. He fought against the British wherever they were. And he was a great restaurateur. And he played a pivotal role in creating a network of Indians in Japan for Indian liberation. Point number 20, we have Jagmohan Chandrani. I think he will be there. He said he would like to come. He's a good friend. And he came to Japan many, many years ago, and he opened Indian restaurant, tea shop. But I think the most important thing that I would like to say about him, he organized the Edogawa community in Nishikasai. He's called the father of the Indian community. And you can see him there in his spice shop, and his tea shop is there. And he's come many times to the university to give lectures. And Nishikasai has around 2,000 Indians and constitutes 10% of the 24,000 Indian population in Japan. Nishikasai has grocery stores, restaurants, schools, and creates a very iconic Indian atmosphere in Japan. So he's the leader of the Indian community of Edogawa and helps newcomers to find housing and food. So he and his wife run a tea shop called Shanti. If you drink that tea, you will feel Shanti. And he imports black tea from India. He's got about 300 different varieties of tea. He also runs Indian restaurants, and he is also supporting 2 Indian primary schools in Japan, which has about 800 students. He wants to build an Indian temple in Japan. Point number 21, the Tokyo War Tribunal had an Indian judge called Radha Binod Pal, whose dissenting voice held the wartime leaders not guilty. So he was also a member of the United Nations International Law Commission, and he sat, and he was one of the dissenting judges. So he is very much appreciated in Japan. And when Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe went to India, he thanked their grandchildren for this kind of great support. Point number 22, that in 1982, Suzuki Motors Corporation entered India at the invitation of the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Little did they realize that within 3 decades, Suzuki would motorize India and control more than half of the passenger car market. So I don't want to talk in detail. I've written a lot about Suzuki. We take our students there. So do ask if you have. I'm kind of cutting this short. But the point I want to make, the success of Suzuki model depends on the cutting edge Japanese technology, new management architecture, leadership initiative, low cost production, and large supplier network after sales and extensive repair and maintenance service. So true to its slogan, Maruti Suzuki has defined the way India drives and will continue to do so in the years to come. Point number 23, the Japanese language boom in India as recent as 2010. So Indian interest in Japanese language began in the early 1950s with the creation of Vishwa Bharati University, and there was much before, and Indian Ministry of Defense. They were offering Japanese classes. But then it kind of became slow during the Second World War and so on. And then you have Delhi University, Pune University, and Jawaharlal Nehru University started these classes. So then with the prime ministers like Manmohan Singh and Modi, they said, we want 10,000, 20,000 people who could speak Japanese. And our Prime Minister Modi wanted Indian primary education to modernize through ethical standards and discipline of Japanese schools. So Japanese schools are seen as great places of training and learning. But we have a shortage of a lot of qualified teachers and lack of effective teaching methods. So lots of colleges in Delhi University are doing very well. St. Stephen's Colleges has got lots and lots of students studying Japanese. And we have Teramoto Sensei, who went and taught Japanese at St. Stephen's College for a year. Point number 24, the high-speed Shinkansen, as you can see, project in India. It was launched in 2017, and we have the construction of very high-speed rail system, which will begin in this year or maybe next. We don't know. So, but once it is completed, it will introduce the Shinkansen E5 series from Mumbai to Ahmedabad. So the insertion of Japanese technology into the very sprawling and huge Indian railway network will definitely modernize the 19th century colonial railway and bring in what is called the omotenashi, or the superior hospitality that Japan has. So I'm sure there are a lot of criticism in the large areas of rail track which needs to be modernized, but I think it's a great endeavor. Point number 25, that India and Japan, they desire a kind of a security economic partnership in the Indo-Pacific region. So this is a very great place, and I think in the Sufi saint of the 17th century, what is his name? I'm forgetting. The brother of Aurangzeb, he predicted that India and Japan would come together. And the multilateral diplomacy to stabilize and to protect the lanes, the sea lanes, is very important given the problems that we are facing today in the Indo-Pacific region. So Japan and India are very keen to develop sustainable partnership, protect the environment, and invest in equity market. So this is the idea of one common goal, the home as a place which belongs to everybody. So Vasudeva Kutumbukam. And the last point I want to talk about today is the partnership in the shadow of the pandemic COVID-19, which has brought the partnership between India and Japan to a standstill, like all other partnerships. So there are promises of security, defense, economic and strategic partnership, securing the Indo-Pacific region. There are promises between leaders, and there is a substantial budget that the Japanese government has created for Japanese companies to relocate wherever they want, from Japan to Australia, where India also comes in. What's my plan? You asked me what is my plan. I don't know, but I think that India could invest in software technology to manage and upgrade Japanese banks, financial institutions, railway stations, information website, business platform, online training, and software development. If there is a situation that arises that India is asked to do, which it has been doing in the past, I'm sure that we have lots of IT professionals who can join force to develop this great infrastructure. So I would like to say that when Japanese go to India, they see there is so much of chaos, like bees are spinning around everywhere, and they don't know where to go, how to manage. But you know, a bee has a beehive, and when you find, what do you find in a beehive? A lot of honey. So there is a sweetness in India in all the chaos. And when you come to Japan, a lot of Japanese Indians who come to Japan, they see order like a car engine, beating very nicely. Everything is systematic and organized. I think we can learn from each other. So in the end, we studied about the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, Radha Binod Pal, Rash Bihari Bose, Indian freedom struggle, Maruti Suzuki Way, Japanese language boom, Shinkansen project, India and Japan multicultural diplomacy, and India-Japan COVID-19 partnership. So to end, I would say that after listening to this lecture, you can identify the meaning of a partnership. Enter the history of over a millennium, talk of ethnocentric and Eurocentric histories, explain the changing nature of this relationship. And with this, I come to the conclusion. Thank you very much for listening and be patient for a long time. Thank you. So the floor is open for questions, and Amita ma'am, you can.
Thank you very much, Professor Williams. It was indeed a very exhaustive and very encompassing talk about the history of Japan and India over 1200 years. And we've received a lot of congratulatory comments saying that presentation was excellent. And many of them, therefore, don't have many questions. At the same time, we have some questions, and I'm not sure how many we can take, but I would start inviting some of the people who have been asking questions. Megha, may I request you to ask your question, because Megha is right here. And let me inform everyone that the reason we are having today's webinar is Megha. Megha has been instrumental in coordinating
Absolutely.
with the South Asia Research Center, Soka University, and with Professor Williams. So please, Megha, you ask your question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Williams, for this wonderful opportunity of, coming together with the JMC family and all of that. So my question for you is that, sir, what do you think is the key cultural cause for better COVID control in Japan compared to India?
Yeah, very good question. I think even before the pandemic, COVID-19, Japanese used to wear masks and had social distancing. They don't embrace each other, they don't kiss, they understand.
Sir, you're on mute.
Oh, can you hear me? So your question about Japan, I think Japanese culture is built in such a manner that it respects social distancing. It practices the use of masks much before this pandemic. So people are very much, and sometimes it is a fashion people wear, not to get infected, but not to make other people get infected. That is a very, so the social concern is very high. So we don't have in Japan the cowboy spirit, to find and do whatever we want. So I think that is one reason. The other is that people take off their shoes before they enter the house, like we Indians do. And they wash their hands many times. So there is a high degree of cleanliness, which I think came very handy during this. So I think these are some of the reasons. I wouldn't say inoculation and so on of the past, but I think these are some of the reasons. Anybody?
Thank you, Professor Williams. Is Shipra Singh there? I would request Shipra Singh to ask her question.
Good afternoon, all. This is Shipra Singh from Gwalior, Jivaji University. My question to sir is, good afternoon, sir. Sir, I want to ask about the tourism industry. What is the scope for the bilateral agreement between Japan and India in terms of tourism sector? Is there any scope for a bilateral agreement?
Well, Japan is a little cautious about setting up a kind of bilateral agreement. You mean between governments,
Exactly, sir.
So, yeah, so that, you see, the problem is that a lot of missions come for 3 years and they work hard to create some kind of a bilateral movement, and then they go away and a new group comes who has to work again. So this kind of thing moves on, and Japan is a little cautious. Being a very old culture, it is a little cautious not to enter into partnerships which don't work. So the idea in Japan is first make it work. Once it works, people are confident and happy. Then we systematize it. So I'm not saying that we don't have a lot of tourism opportunity. We have a lot. I know lots of people who do business with India in Japan, Indians and Japanese. But it is one-to-one. It is not on the big governmental level, though there is support. And recently, the Japanese government did talk about bringing in lot of Indian IT professionals and giving them concessions of 5 years visa and so on. But then, you have this pandemic coming in and everything has come to a standstill. So I'm sure there is a lot of hope, and there have been cases in piecemeal where banks have taken the help of a major segment of the Indian IT community to transform the bank, and the banks have been transformed. So those are areas which are there, but there's no clear bilateral agreement in this. There's more in terms of security and maritime security and so on, but not the tourist thing, the tourism. I'm sure this is a very good point and should happen. Sooner or later it would, I think. That's my thinking.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I was very intrigued, and I think we'll have to have a full webinar about the education system in Japan.
Oh, yes, that is
the primary education and the higher education both. And there is Sharwani who wants to ask about collaborative research between, I think, universities in India and Japan. So,
yes.
Sharwani, if you're here, you may ask your question.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful, insightful presentation. So I am very interested to understand from where should I start if we take, we consider conducting research between both the countries in the field of psychology. So how do we go on about it? Where do we start?
I think psychology, if you want to work in that, are you talking about clinical psychology?
I would talk about mental health, like overall, to explore the consciousness of both the people, Japanese people and the Indian people. So
I would say two things. I mean, one, which is a layman's thing, to talk about the Vedic culture and yoga. This is one. Okay. This is a very generalist kind of thing. But when you talk about medical psychology, then one could work in the area of, schizophrenia. This is a very catatonic schizophrenia. World is very, very powerful. And I think in Japan and India, this is a big issue. People feel very disturbed because of the pressure of work. And this kind of thing is increasing. That could be a very interesting area of work. Then the pressures of city life. Pressures of city life and how it affects daily living. So this would be in the medical area, but for that you need to be a medical practitioner. But otherwise, if you are not and you are a generalist, then yoga and breathing exercises and so on, they can be a very interesting collaboration. Could be done. So Zen, because Zen is very popular in Japan, Zen and maybe the Vedic tradition or the Buddhist tradition, Japanese Buddhism and Indian Buddhism, or the techniques of living and life and how to approach the world could be an interesting area to work.
Yes, thank you so much, sir, for the answer.
I would now request one of my colleagues, Christo Dos, and Dr. Christo Dos wanted to ask a question.
Yes, Professor Dos.
Thank you so much, Professor Mukesh Williams, for your interesting and enlightening talk.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, because we teach a paper Far East, China and Japan at the Delhi University level, and we also read some of the interesting literature, how there is a growing demand for English language in Japan, and how the local students particularly flock to Indian schools to learn English. I'm just wondering if you could reflect on this. Could you think, could you please throw some light on how the Indian educational institutions in Japan create an intellectual ambience for, let's say, intercultural interactions, apart from developing Japanese economy? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dos. I know Aftab Seth, who was the former ambassador to Japan, and he's connected to the Singapore International Indian Schools. And also Jagmohan Chandrani, whom I mentioned, he is kind of instrumental in kind of establishing 2 schools in Nishikasai. So these schools are quite popular with Japanese. And the reason for the popularity is their emphasis on mathematics and science. So Japanese young people, mothers would like to send their children to these places. The problem is they are not recognized by the Japanese government. So what kind of degree they would get? So I think it is in the initial stages, but the students who come out from there are quite smart. They follow the CBSE and so on. They're quite smart. And the intensity of work is very high. But this is the dilemma of Japanese parents, whether to send them to Japanese school or not. Because, Japanese is a very important language, the center of the Japanese tradition and culture. It would be tough for them to find jobs in Japan, Yeah. So this is the dilemma. But the Indian schools in Japan are doing very well. But at the same time, the kind of the tuition fee is a little low. And because of that, the teachers don't get enough high salary. So it is also an issue, the kind of people we bring in and the support we get from the Indian or the Japanese government is something that is missing at the time. So otherwise, I think that the Indian schools in Japan are doing reasonably well, given the kind of financial support they have and how they manage their system.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
I have a few more names, but I'm not sure if we have the time. So maybe ask Danish if he's here to ask his question, the last question. Okay, it seems that probably he has left.
Okay.
I'm aware that we are running beyond time, so I will end the question answer session. I would request Dr. Alka Marwa to send the vote. Niyati, do you want to ask
Yes,
something?
ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. My mic is unmuting now. Sorry for the trouble. Sir, I want to ask, what are the serious concerns in Japan-India's relation which can strain the relations on both sides and how they can overcome? Like Japan has taken its outstance in the Road and Belt Initiative also, or neither providing military hardware. So how they can overcome these serious concerns?
Now, what are the problems? Do you feel there is a problem?
Yes, sir. Like Japan is a strategic partner of India, but it neither provide the military hardware or like the military support, and neither the the nuclear power status is seen with apprehension by Japan.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, you see, Japan is providing, Hitachi and Mitsubishi are providing lots of things to India, and this is a business. And in fact, Japan had proposed India's name in part of the nuclear suppliers group, which was rejected by China, and America also supported. So after the US moved towards India, Japan also moved towards India, and it's like a business. Though they have said that if India explodes a nuclear without Pakistan doing it first, then it will stop all connection and trade. But otherwise, it is going perfectly well, better than expected. And as far as military hardware goes, some of it has already gone in terms of aircraft and so on. The problem is not this. The problem is what I understand between the two groups. India says, oh, Japan ought to do a little bit more. Japan says, we are doing enough. So this mismatch of perception is there.
Yes.
But I think that is more to do with the cultural attitude. And Japan is surprised. India is surprised. Japan said, we are doing a lot. You are saying we are not doing anything. We are doing a lot of stuff. India says, you can do a little bit more. This kind of this kind of mismatch between this, a lot of business is happening.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Thank you,
So
sir.
don't get taken away by all these journalists who talk a lot of stuff. See on the ground reality, there is business going on, and more now is happening because of the problem both India and Japan face with the rising power of China. More is happening, not less.
So, thank you, sir. I must apologize to some of the participants whose questions we could not take because of positive time. May I now request Professor Kinoshito to propose a vote of thanks. He's a professor of literature at Soka University.
Professor Amita Mutuani, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good afternoon. I'm Kaoru Kinoshita, a member of the Faculty of Letters, Soka University. Thank you very much for joining us. Especially, I'd like to express my deepest thanks to our distinguished guests in Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi, for giving us such a wonderful occasion of talking on Japan and India, historical and cultural partnerships. I sincerely appreciate all your good offices and help. Principal Dr. Sandra Joseph, former principal, Sister Rosary, IQAC coordinator, Dr. Aruka Maruwaha, Dr. Amita Mutuani, and IQAC, JMC, webinar team. Please accept our best thanks. It's our high honor to hold a symposium in association with such a prestigious college as you. I also express my sincere thanks to my colleague, Professor Mukesh Williams. Sensei, thank you very much for your excellent lecture.
Arigato.
I believe what we have learned from this symposium will certainly help us in the future, although we are now facing the worldwide difficulties in the pandemic or post-pandemic situation. Well, they say brevity is a soul of wit. So, I would like to conclude my speech by saying that we are most pleased if we could build up an enduring friendship between us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kinoshita.
Thank you very much.
May I now request Dr. Alka Marwa, who's the coordinator of IQAC at JMC and associate professor in the maths department, to propose a vote of thanks from JMC side.
Thank you, Amita. It is indeed a moment of great honor for Jesus and Mary College to have collaborated with SARC, South Asia Research Center of Soka University, Japan, over today's webinar on historical and cultural partnership between Japan and India. It would not be an exaggeration to call it a momentous event in the history of these two great institutions, for it is going to pave way for many more meaningful academic collaborations in future. I also deem today's webinar significant because it is happening on the first anniversary of SARC at Soka University. So congratulations to SARC and Soka University. So on behalf of IQAC and Principal, Jesus and Mary College, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Ryohei Tanaka, Director SARC and Vice President of Soka University, for taking the initiative to make this webinar a reality. I'm sure this alliance between JMC and Soka University through SARC is just the beginning of a long and fruitful research association. Thank you, Professor Mukesh Williams, for giving a very insightful perspective of a 1200-year-old historical and cultural ties between India and Japan in such a cogent and cohesive manner. Not only have you taken us down the lanes of our ancient past, but have given us the hope that these ties can be revived in a most deep and constructive manner at so many levels, whether spiritual, educational, political, economical, or technological. Thank you, sir. We are indeed grateful to Professor Kaoru Kinoshita, Faculty of Letters at Soka University, and Dr. Ui Teramoto from SARC for lending their support in coordinating this webinar. Thanks are also due to Mr. Hiroki Shimoide, Administrative Director at Global Core Center, and Ms. Tushita Arora, Administrator at Global Core Center, for rendering technical expertise while working in tandem with our webinar team. Next, I have the pleasant task of thanking the JMC webinar team that has worked under the able guidance of Dr. Amita Motwani. Also, thank you, Dr. Motwani, for beautifully moderating today's session. Let me begin by thanking Ms. Megha Jacob, faculty at Department of Economics, for coordinating with SARC and Soka University and being instrumental in organizing this webinar. Thanks are due to Dr. Shikha Singh, faculty, Department of Mathematics, for her creative skills in making the poster along with Ms. Tushita Arora, to Dr. Christu Dos, faculty, Department of History, for doing such wonderful publicity of the webinar and getting an overwhelming response, to Dr. Naveen Thomas, Faculty, Department of Economics, Ms. Vrinda Muda, Faculty, Department of Commerce, and Mr. Gaurav Verma, IT Consultant in Administration, for taking care of all technical details and ensuring a smooth run of today's webinar. It gives me immense happiness to thank and welcome our new principal, Dr. Sandra Joseph, for assuming the role of the head of JMC fraternity and giving such a warm welcome to one and all present here. In the same vein, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Dr. Sister Rosalie, our former principal, for being the motivating spirit behind this webinar. We are positive that the seed of this alliance between JMC, SARC, and Soka University that has been sown under the charge of Dr. Sister Rosalie and Professor Tanaka shall blossom into a fruitful collaboration in times to come under the guidance and leadership of Dr. Sandra Joseph. Last but not least, I wish to thank everybody who has participated in today's webinar and for being such a wonderful and enthusiastic audience. We would love to have your participation in our future webinars as well. Wish you all a good day. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.